Good morning, everybody. Good morning from Brussels. It's a couple of minutes before the start of our webinar, but we thought we'd open it up to let people in. Now, the me, the moderator, and the three panelists, we can't see at all how many of you there are, who you are. So it would be really great if you could take to the chat and just give us a hello, give us a sign of life, let us know that we're not just talking into the void. And that there are actually people out here listening to this webinar. We won't start with the topic until it's actually time in a minute or two. But in the meantime, if you would like to get onto the chat, just let us know where you're joining from. I said good morning because I'm in Brussels, but those of you in the UK also good morning, but other people might be joining from elsewhere around the globe. You never know. It might be lunchtime, it might be the afternoon. So let us know where you're joining from. Give us your name. Let us know a little bit about you. Anything you'd like to share with us in the chat to make us feel a little less lonely here in front of our screens would be very much welcome. My name's Jenny. I'm from the European Commission's Interpreting Service, and I'll be introducing myself and my fellow panelists in just a minute when we get started with the webinar proper. We're getting some reactions in the chat. Thank you very much. That's a relief because I was starting to get a bit worried that there actually genuinely wasn't anybody out there. So we've got some French and Italian students from London. Okay. Also from the UK. Excellent. Anyone else from anywhere in the UK? Okay, we've got Nora saying good morning. Good morning, Nora. Good morning also to Maria and all the French and Italian students joining us in London. Lille in France, fantastic. That's really great. So we've got a few people joining from various European countries, from the UK, from France, not from Sweden, from the UK, but Swedish colleague, fantastic. An Estonian connecting from Brussels, fantastic. We've got quite a strong UK representation here today. Excellent. And from Germany, yes. Hi, Verena. That's lovely. Thank you very much. It's 11:16, so we are going to start with this panel discussion, which is called Interpreting for the EU, Challenges and Opportunities in a Fast Evolving World. Which is an awful lot to unpack. And since we're talking about interpreting for the EU, I'm absolutely delighted that on the panel here with me today are representatives from all three interpreting services in the European Union. We've got Anna Collins joining us from the European Parliament, Kate Skitt from the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and Kevin McCarthy, who's a colleague of mine at SCIC. My name's Jenny Taylor. I work for SCIC, which is the European Commission's interpretation service. And just before we get started, again, we've had a few comments from you all in the chat, but I also just have a brief poll I'd like to launch to just get an idea as to who's in the audience, what your areas of interest might be. So we're just going to ask you one question about yourselves in this poll, which I will launch now, and I'll leave it open for just a minute or so. It shouldn't be too difficult for you to respond to that. But basically, we'd like to find out whether you already work as an interpreter, whether you work exclusively as an interpreter, whether you interpret, but also, I don't know, teach languages, teach yoga, run a bakery. There's all sorts of things that you could do in addition to interpreting. We have quite a few interesting colleagues who, in addition to being interpreters, also pursue other interesting careers. Or whether you're interested in languages in general, study and work in another language-related field. That seems to be the trending one for the time being. At the moment, I'm seeing over 60% of people working or studying in another language-related field, so not necessarily interpreters, which is good for us to know because we know that we're not necessarily talking to people who already know everything there is to know about interpreting. We've got a few interpreting students as well. I'm going to end the poll at this point, but yes, as I say, the vast majority of people actually working or studying in another language-related field, not necessarily interpreting. Second, the runner-up is interpreting students, so we've got quite a few interpreting students in the room, and some people already working as interpreters as well. That's wonderful. Thank you very much for participating in that. As you can see, these are the results of our poll. So yeah, quite a mixture of people in the audience here with us today. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'd like to get us started on today's topic, as I said, interpreting for the EU, challenges and opportunities. And so, of course, yes, challenges in a fast evolving world are, many. I'm sure we could all think of many challenges that we've faced as professionals over the last few years, COVID being the obvious one, but also just the extreme fast pace of real-time information that's made available, new, sort of geopolitical situations arising all the time, climate change being a big challenge. So there are huge challenges faced by the interpreting community, the EU, and just societies at large, but also the opportunities of this fast evolving world. And these are the things we're going to be discussing here today. My fellow panelists, I've already named them, but I'd now like to give them the floor to introduce themselves. So I'd like to start with Kevin from the European Commission. Perhaps you can briefly introduce yourself, explain what the European Commission Interpreting Service does, what languages you work with, and perhaps name one top challenge or opportunity for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Kevin McCarthy. So I work, as Jenny said, as an interpreter for DG SCIC, which is the Commission's interpreting service, one of the three. So we provide interpreting for the European Commission, of course, but a few other institutions as well. There's the Council, which is basically the representatives of all the member states. So we provide interpreting for them. And also some other institutions like the European Economic and Social Committee, Committee of the Regions. We provide interpreting for the various different presidencies, etc. So it's quite a varied work. It's quite good. We like to proudly say all the time, we're the largest interpreting service in the world. We have about over quite a few hundred staff interpreters. I don't know, Jenny, if you can correct me on that. I think it was around 500 staff at DG SCIC, and quite a lot of freelance interpreters. We employ huge amounts of freelance interpreters as well, and we wouldn't be able to do our job without freelance interpreters, who are an essential part of DG SCIC. So basically about me, I've been working at DG SCIC on staff since 2011. For a few years, I was a freelance before that. So that often is the case that people start out as freelancers, become staff, or people just want to be freelancers, have a bit of flexibility as well in their professional lives. So a lot of people aren't really interested in becoming staff as well, want to work as freelancers. So the languages I do French, Spanish, Dutch, and Romanian into English. Again, at DG SCIC, and I think the other interpreting services as well, one of the features is that we usually work from our C languages, so our passive languages, into our A language, which is for the most part our mother tongue. In smaller language units, people do retours, so they'll usually work into English, French, or German. In my case, just passive languages. And currently, I am struggling to learn German. So again, with part of the whole thing in interpreting is that you learn languages throughout your career, which is great. In terms of challenges, I think one that I think is a bit of a challenge is climate change. Now, you might not think that would have a huge effect on interpreting. You might ask what the link is between climate change and interpreting. But I do think that there's going to be a bit of issues. For example, in the past, you might have had somebody who'd fly to Brussels or fly somewhere to give a presentation. And I think nowadays that's not really something that can really happen. Somebody can't just fly to Brussels for a day, give a presentation, and fly back halfway across the planet. And so I think what you're going to have to do is you're going to have these people connecting remotely into meetings. Maybe some meetings, if in the future it's possible that they will move entirely online. So that's going to be a challenge for us. So there is a major argument for people not flying all the way across the world. Now, I do think actually people prefer to meet face to face. There are some technical challenges with the various platforms. As we've discovered, they don't always work wonderfully well. You know, there are problems with sound, there are problems with images, all kinds of problems with them. I think over time, those will improve. We hope they will. I think they will as technology improves. Better internet connections, better sound, etc. For the time being, that's a challenge. But I think it could also be quite interesting as well. That could also be an opportunity. I think things change. I'm pretty sure back in the 1950s and 1960s, people were saying this bloody simultaneous is never going to catch on. No, we can't be having that. You know, I'm going to stick with consecutive. No. No, but I think things do change, and there's going to be change. We just have to see how we manage that. But I think again, climate change is an argument now for not having people jetting across the planet back and forth. But I still think people prefer to meet face to face. So we're going to have to see how we manage all of that. So I think that's about it for me. I'll let you move on to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, there was a lot there already going to the heart of the debate. Anna, perhaps I can turn to you with the same questions. Who are you? What does your institution do? How does your service work? And what's your top challenge or opportunity?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this meeting. And it's great to see my colleagues, also Kate and Kevin and Jenny, that I don't get to see every day. My name is Anna Collins-Mauney, and I work in the English department at the Interpreting Service for the European Parliament. And this service provides all of the interpreting needs for the European Parliament, which has 705 members from all of the EU member states. And they require interpreting in the various activities that they carry out. So the European Parliament is one of the two members of the legislative branch of the European Union. So they're crafting legislation all the time. And that requires meetings in committees, in delegations, meetings with other countries, meetings with experts. And so the interpreting service of the European Parliament is here to make sure that every member can speak in the language of their choice and that the citizens can listen to what's happening in their language. And in fact, in the rules of procedure of the European Parliament, and I'm paraphrasing here, it does say that all documents shall be drawn up in the official languages, that all members shall have the right to speak in the official language of their choice, and that interpretation shall be provided in committees and delegation meetings. So that is the work that is done. Now, I don't know about the size of interpreting services these days, so I won't try to place the European Parliament's interpreting service in terms of largest, smallest, but it's definitely a highly flexible and an extremely nimble service that provides what is needed when it's needed, where it's needed. And in fact, not only does the European Parliament provide interpreting for the meetings I just mentioned, but also during the Conference on the Future of Europe, our service was really involved in providing the interpreting for that, which was extremely interesting and a great opportunity to hear directly from the citizens of Europe and to interpret for them and from them, which was a fantastic opportunity. Now, I personally work, like Kevin, from 4 passive languages, as we call them, or C languages was one of the other things that we use by way of jargon. I work from Italian, French, Spanish, and Portuguese into English. And I would say, if I have to think about the biggest challenge, I also liked that Kevin linked it up to opportunity, because in the end, when I was thinking about what the biggest challenge might be, I recognized an opportunity there as well. As I said in the rules of procedure, the members need to be able to speak in their official language, the official language of their choice. And I think that one of the things I enjoy the most about my job is walking into the plenary hemicycle when we provide interpreting in all of the languages, all 24 to date. And it's really an amazing, daunting experience, but it's what we work up to and it's what we are here for. And it's really the culmination of so much work, both personally as interpreters, but also legislatively, of course, as members of the European Parliament. It's very fast paced. So for the future, I think that perhaps the biggest challenge is going to be able to keep providing that service as much as it's needed, where it's needed, and where it's needed most. And that's going to require an enormous amount of flexibility. I very much hope personally, this is a personal opinion, that there will be more members, meaning more languages. And so that's going to be a tremendous challenge, but an enormous opportunity. And I'm extremely optimistic about that. Also, to our students out there, one of the big bottlenecks in providing the service is sometimes English language interpreters. So just keep that in mind. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna. I'd now like to give the floor to Kate from the Court of Justice with the same sort of, please introduce yourself and your top challenge or opportunity.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I'm Kate Skitt and I work for the European Court of Justice. So we're over in Luxembourg, we're not in Brussels. And please don't get us confused with the court in Strasbourg, as many people do. So I'm in Luxembourg. And so we see various different types of actions brought before the two courts of the European Court of Justice. So I normally work in court hearings, and we see those in any of the official languages of the EU, because a key part of multilingualism in the EU is, of course, access to justice in all languages without language barriers. We at the court are a much smaller service. There's only 70 or so staff members, so we're the smallest interpreting service amongst the major EU institutions. And we do also rely on a lot of freelancers. We also mostly work into our mother tongue, but we do have some people using retours for some of the smaller booths. And I have been working as an interpreter since 2010. I did indeed start off in Brussels as a freelancer, as many of us did. And I have been on staff now in Luxembourg since 2017. And what I really enjoy here at the court is the opportunity to really become an expert on a specific field, a specific legal topic, because one of the specific things about the court and work here is that we have a whole day's preparation of the case file. And a lot of the time you need that because of the very complex issues. And it is really nice to really get to grips with the subject and then have the adrenaline of having to really know your stuff on mic when you're put on the spot on the day. And I should mention, we often work with text because the lawyers often come along with a long text that they want to plead before the judges. So that's one aspect of our work as well. And I think that perhaps one of our opportunities today is that despite us seeing a lot of artificial intelligence being used, people saying that we're going to get replaced by robots and computers, I think for such complex matters, and there's often technical issues that are dealt with over in Brussels as well, I think for that, when it becomes rather complex, or even when it just becomes rather emotional, you need that human touch. And I think whatever happens with AI, I think we have that opportunity to add that human touch, add the colour to the language that's used. And I think that's also an opportunity, even though we do face perhaps some challenges.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you to all three of you. Before starting off with a few more questions on some of the issues that you've mentioned, I did have a few announcements for the audience that I forgot to make in the beginning, so I'm going to make them now. We would like this to be an interactive session. You're in the audience, but you are more than welcome to ask us your questions. You can use the Q&A function for that. So along the bottom, you should have a Q&A option, and if you post your questions there, we will pick up on them and try to answer them as best we can. So please do post your questions in the Q&A. We also have our colleague from SCIC, Diana, with us, who will be keeping an eye on the chat and on the questions, and anything that you would like to ask us, hear from us about, please go ahead. We would love to hear from you in the audience as well. So all three of you in your introductions there already mentioned various topics that fall squarely within the subject of today's discussion. Kevin mentioned climate change, Kate mentioned AI, but I'd perhaps like to start with something that Anna was talking about, which is this idea of multilingualism, and that at the end of the day, that is something that is one of the core values of the EU, as we are united in diversity, as the motto goes. 24 official languages, and you hinted at enlargement there, and future enlargement, more languages coming in. At the same time, I think it's safe to say that there's also a trend towards more and more English being used in international contexts and people becoming more proficient in English. And I was curious to hear perhaps about that dichotomy in your working experience. Would you, say that multilingualism is alive and well and thriving in the EU, or is there a real challenge for us that everything, is going to be reduced to, well, I say English, but others would call it Globish, and that people end up saying simply what they are able to in their limited, English, rather than what they would actually like to say? And maybe I can give Kate the floor on this one first, and then Kevin, and then Anna.
Yes, of course. We do see the younger generation speaking better English, or perhaps they're better at speaking various languages. But yes, you're right. Often the trend is Globish. However, I am pleased to say that the court does buck the trend somewhat, because based on the principle of equal access to justice in the European Union, anyone has to be able to lodge an action in the language of their choice. So any official language can be used. And the good thing about interpreting at the court is that means that the cases are lodged often in the language of the person or the company involved. Or if member states are involved, then they have to speak one of the official languages of the country. So say, although if you have Dutch in your combination, you might feel that the Dutch are always so good at English that you don't ever hear any Dutch. Well, we get a whole day of Dutch because the language of proceedings is Dutch. All the documents are lodged in Dutch. All the lawyers have to speak Dutch. And also the member states come along. So say, if Belgium were to come, they would either speak French or Dutch, and the same for all other countries. So we actually do get a good workout from our languages. And one little point is that we are still the bastion of French being spoken. French is our lingua franca. This is our language that's always used. So especially for those students the people that were in France, the French booth is very important. There's always a French booth here in every hearing. They're the ones that are recorded, and here the language that's always used for communication is French. So it's not always English. I'm just to buck the trend there.
Thanks, Kate. Kevin, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so again, with us, it varies a little bit. It does depend. And it really depends, because I spend a lot of time working in the council. It really depends on who's got the presidency there as well. That often sets the tone. At the moment, it's the Spanish presidency, and they speak Spanish. So basically, at the moment, every meeting I'm in is chaired in Spanish. That changes, and again, it depends. But it also depends really on the context. English is used a lot. I mean, you can't deny that. It's dominant in many cases. And for example, in meetings, we talk about interpreting regimes. So meetings, let's say, where you've got all 27 representatives of all 27 member states meeting, but you just have maybe French, German, and English as the interpreting languages, then in that case, English will dominate. But there are meetings where everybody is able to speak their language. So all of the official languages are covered. And in that case, people tend to speak their language because they see everyone else doing it. It's like, oh, well, I'm able to speak my language. Everyone is speaking their own languages. They actually have confidence in the interpreting. They say, oh, it works. It works quite well. And they tend to trust it, and they tend to use it. So the languages, the meetings where you've got the big language regime where everyone is able to speak their own language actually tend to be quite good in multilingualism. Languages, there's a smaller regime, and because people are kind of, let's say the Hungarians are going to have to speak English unless they speak German, then that kind of sets the tone. And obviously everyone is, not everyone, but quite a lot of people are going to speak English. And also there's another context in that, yes, sometimes, in SCIC, we've a massive range of things that we interpret, from heads of state and government all the way to going to inspect a fish canning facility or something, And in the latter case, yes, you're not going to have, if you're on the Baltic coast of Poland at a fish canning factory, it's unlikely that the people there will speak English all the time, or feel comfortable using English as their working language. So really, there's a big variety of things we interpret, and it really depends on the context as well. So yes, English does dominate, but it really does depend.
Thanks. Yes, if I can just perhaps chime in on that, it does, in my experience as well, if people are able to speak their own language, they're generally quite grateful for the opportunity and happy to do it. And as you say, maybe what, we often observe in sort of international settings is not representative of, people in more local communities. And Anna, you also touched upon the Conference on the Future of Europe, which I think is sort of point in case of this. Anna, please, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, thank you. I loved what you just said, Jenny and Kevin, about the more languages that are offered, the more languages that are spoken. I have observed that myself as well. And I also would agree that English is spoken a lot. It's used a lot, but it does vary on the context very much here at the European Parliament too. There are some areas where the European Parliament tends to speak well, let me see. Let's look at the Fisheries Committee, for example. There, you're not going to hear as much English. It just tends to be dominated by Spanish and Portuguese and Greek and Italian and Danish. And so that's fantastic. And in the Agricultural Committee as well, there's a lot of German. It's a very multilingual committee. When it comes to foreign affairs and economic affairs and things like that, you do tend to hear a bit more English. But I would agree with you all that I think when given the chance, people will use the language. And during the Conference on the Future of Europe, we got a lot of languages and a lot of languages spoken, and that really rekindled my hope for this effective multilingualism. And the citizens did use their own languages, so that was great.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think when it comes to, the EU not being perceived as this sort of, far away, removed structure from the citizens as well, multilingualism is incredibly important, not just in the interpreting that we do at conferences, but also when it comes to, making content available in various languages, where our colleagues in the various translation services also play an extremely important role, of course. Just before moving on, there's a couple of questions already in the Q&A that I might like to take at this juncture. And two of them, from what I see, have to do with routes to interpreting, how you become an interpreter, how you apply to become an interpreter. Sorry, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. Yes, so perhaps I can just read out one question from Sarah, who says she's a sixth form teacher and is promoting careers in languages. Please, could you tell us a little bit about your routes into interpreting? Perhaps we can just very briefly take that one, because I think that might be of interest to several people in the audience. Kevin, would you like to start, perhaps?
Yeah. So again, sixth form, I presume, because being from Ireland, I presume that's the last year. Is it in secondary school? Yeah. I think, around that stage as well, I'd done French at secondary school. I hadn't done really many languages, but I was very keen on studying languages. And after ending secondary school, I went to university. I did languages at university. I did French and Spanish. And again, all throughout the 4 years of studying that, what could I do? What kind of job could I do? And I thought interpreting could be an interesting career. It still took me a while to get into interpreting. I ended up, long story, but I won't get into it, but I ended up doing an interpreting master's degree in Romania, of all places. So again, that was another language added to the two that I'd studied before, French, Spanish, and then Romanian. But yeah, I just thought it could be a very interesting job. And it really is the sort of job where learning more languages is actually, you have to obviously learn them to quite a high level, but you're encouraged to learn more languages rather than focus on just one, narrowly focus on one. And I think what's great about interpreting as well is that it's very practical. I mean, if you're studying interpreting, the interpreting courses, interpreting master's courses, this appealed to me especially. It's not very theoretical. You're not reading books about theory. You're not reading big sort of thick novels, 19th century Spanish novels or anything. No, you're really actually learning something very practical. You learn a practical skill, which really appealed to me. Obviously, you have to have, another thing that does appeal to me is you have to be very interested in the world around you, have a lot of general knowledge, which I always liked. So that helps as well. So those are the things that appeal to me. Yeah, and getting into interpreting, well, there's a variety of material. I don't know, Jenny, if you could maybe, if there's any websites, etc. There's also a list of interpreting courses that SCIC cooperates with, etc. So we have a lot of courses as well. We have like outreach events, etc. So I don't know if we can maybe help out with that.
Yes, perhaps I can just point out that my colleague Diana has been posting a few things in the chat as well, links to websites about interpretation. There had been a question that I believe has been answered in the Q&A about how to become an accredited interpreter specifically for the Court of Justice. One thing I might mention at this juncture is that the accreditation tests are all interinstitutional, meaning that you take one test and then you are put on a list that all three interpreting services can access. So you could find yourself interpreting for the European Commission, for the European Parliament, or for the European Court of Justice, depending on your language combination, depending on where you are living, so what we call your domicile, where your domicile is. Different services will have a more specific interest in certain profiles. I think for a lot of people, the road to interpreting does start with a degree in languages and then a more specialized degree in conference interpreting. I don't know if anyone else has any more on our panel here, has a more exotic route. I know that there are colleagues who come to it much later in life. I don't know, maybe Anna and Kate. Anna first, would you like to briefly say how you came to be an interpreter?
Of course, I would love to. I grew up in a family where we spoke only English, in a part of the world, Wisconsin, where I hardly ever heard anything. Now that's changed, don't get me wrong, but when I was a kid in Wisconsin, I didn't hear a lot of other languages being spoken around me. But I very early on had a keen interest in languages. And so I too, like Kevin, studied French and Spanish in high school. And we're going through all the vocabulary of the various school levels today. And then I wanted to be I thought I wanted to be a French teacher. And so that's what I set out to do. And then very early on, I realized that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And I had never heard of interpreting. So I was living in Paris at the time, working as a bilingual secretary. And I started exploring what might be possible with languages. And I found conference interpreting. And then I did my master's in conference interpreting. And when I forgot to mention this in the introduction, I passed my accreditation test, which puts you on the roster to work for all of the European institutions, in 2009. And I worked as a freelance interpreter for 10 years. And I started with French and Italian. Many interpreters, at least for the English unit, I would say, start with two languages, one of which is French or German. And then I added the other two in a subsequent phase. And I came on staff in 2019. So essentially that was my path. Thank you.
Thanks. What about you, Kate?
Yes, I also studied French and German at A level. So I studied at sixth form in the UK. And I also studied maths and chemistry, and I was going to study maths at university, but they wouldn't let me do half maths, half French. It was maths with a little bit of French. And I realized, oh, actually, my heart's not in it. I'm going to study languages. So I took the standard route of a languages degree and then the master's in conference interpreting at Bath. I think I've seen that with some other students at Bath University on the MATE course. But I would just point out that you don't have to study languages as your degree. We do have colleagues who studied law and then they did a master's in conference interpreting because they had the languages. And I also must point out that you don't need a law degree to be an interpreter at the Court of Justice. To be a lawyer linguist, which is the translators who work here translating all the case law and the judgments, yes, they do need a law degree. We don't need a law degree, but it helps. You need that general knowledge, you need the technical knowledge, you need the curiosity about lots of different fields. So whatever you want to study, if you've got the languages, you can study something else at undergraduate level. And I would just say, if there was a specific question about the Court of Justice and the profiles we need here, we do take people from freelancers from the interinstitutional accreditation list. But one of our main requirements is that you have French in your combination because it's such a big language here. So we like people who have enough experience to be able to deal with the legal parts of things, and French is key for us.
Great, thank you very much. So yes, just talking about, careers in languages, obviously there's other possible careers in languages, not just interpreting. There's translation, there's the lawyer linguist service here at the EU, as you mentioned. Was it, oh, I don't know who mentioned now, Anna or Kate, one of you mentioned it. And since a lot of people in the audience are from the UK, I would perhaps just point out, one of the elephants in the room, that since Brexit, UK nationals cannot be employed on staff, but there's no nationality limits when it comes to working as a freelance interpreter for the European Union, and there's plenty of work for English interpreters, UK nationals as freelance interpreters. And there was something else I was going to say on that topic, but anyway, so there are plenty of different professional opportunities to do with languages at the EU. There was another question, one more general question about third languages that I can perhaps just answer, saying, are there opportunities at the EU institutions with non-EU languages such as Russian or Turkish? Thank you in advance for your reply. I'd say yes. I know that they do organize interinstitutional accreditation tests for non-EU languages as well. And we regularly work with colleagues, from the Turkish booth, the Arabic booth, Chinese, Japanese, all sorts of other non-EU languages. We have colleagues who are accredited with those languages. So yes, I would encourage you to look at the website to see in the testing calendar whether there are any upcoming tests for those non-EU languages, but there definitely is a need for non-EU languages here at the institutions as well. Now, the next question I'd like to take kind of brings us a bit back to the topic of today's panel, which is AI. And I'll read out the question. As an interpreting student at the University of Bath, I'm constantly asked by lay people why I'm studying interpreting if AI is going to phase us out. I always respond that AI does not do an effective job interpreting, and most people tend to say, yes, AI doesn't do a good job yet. So what would be the best way to respond to that kind of an argument, in your opinion? Anna, would you like to kick off on this one, putting you on the spot a bit?
Yes, yeah, I will. It's a really hard question, and I don't think anyone knows the answer. I think we know that AI is moving extremely quickly, and things have sped up recently. My personal belief is that it will be of assistance to us and not replace us. And I think that there are areas in which we will be able to, like any other profession, use AI to become better and more precise at our jobs. But I know for the time being, there isn't any system that is in place that will be able to do the job that we do. So I think I was at a talk in the not so distant past by a linguist who said that language is the real defining characteristic of who we are as human beings, and therefore that will always be the case and cannot be replaced. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next, I think, 5 to 10 years as things progress rapidly. My hope is that there will be some development that will help me to do a better version of the job that I'm already doing.
Thanks, Anna. Kate, would you like to come in on this question too, AI?
I think AI can help us at the moment, but luckily it can't replace us just yet for those very complicated concepts. Also, our documents and our hearings, and the submissions to the hearings, they're rather confidential, so we can't always just use AI at the moment. And as I said, I think even even if we get artificial intelligence that's very well trained and can recognize all the different subtleties of accents and misspeaking and correct itself, I think we'll still need that added human touch. We'll still need someone just to double check that that is the real legal concept or the real Latin phrase that's been cited when they switch from English to Latin, say. So yes, the writing on the wall is that we will get assisted probably to a great extent by these tools, but hopefully we won't be completely replaced just yet.
Because yes, we're not just talking about AI, obviously you said other tools, there's things like, automated subtitling and all kinds of things that, as you say, will probably play a role in multilingual conferences. But I think that even with new technologies, there's always going to be meetings where you will need human interpreters to provide the service. One sort of example, you touched upon it briefly, Kate, when you said that AI might eventually evolve to a point where it can correct itself, but that is one of the key advantages that we as humans currently have over AI, is that we can correct ourselves if we at first misunderstand something, or indeed if the speaker misspeaks. They say that it's November 2022 when we all know that it's November 2023. We can make those judgment calls, potentially correct on the spot, come back later to correct something that we at first got wrong. And AI, when it gets it wrong with utter conviction, and it's then very difficult to find out where the mistake was made. Whereas, at least as human interpreters, we still have those reflexes to the plausibility checks that we're constantly carrying out in our work. Is what I'm saying actually making sense in this context? And AI certainly is not there yet. Kevin, would you like to come in as well?
Yeah, I think I'm actually more of an AI skeptic than most other people. I think there's a lot of hype about it, honestly, and I'm not sure that that there's this whole idea that all these professions are going to get replaced by AI. I think there's certain interests that want us to think that, yes, maybe, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist. Yes, it can be of use, but I think there's a lot of kind of the tech sector is really trying to hype it up a lot. And I think there's some things, for example, it's AI can be, because it's able to absorb a lot of material in the English language, because it scrapes the internet for all this stuff. That's fine. But for example, a smaller language like one that I interpret is Romanian. I don't think like AI is particularly good with Romanian, for example, because there's just less material on the internet to train it, So again, it really depends on the languages between different languages. And again, one thing that I often think about when it comes to AI is that, I quite often do a meeting chaired by a Spanish guy who's incredibly colorful, loves his bullfighting metaphors, always constantly making jokes, etc., etc. And I honestly don't think AI will be able to deal with him. And as an interpreter, again, you have to deal with different accents, different people. There's a human element to it. There's a human element to it. You have to, as an interpreter, really, what I always say to interpreting students is, the fundamental building block of interpreting is that you understand somebody as another human. You have to have a certain human empathy for them to see where they're coming from and where they're going. I don't think a machine can do that. And the other thing is, people just don't want to listen to a robot all day. No matter how convincing it is, there's always something a little bit off about it. And I just don't think somebody would want to sit in a room all day long and listen to something artificial. As humans, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to have, but people will tolerate that, I think, more than even a sort of fairly convincing robot that has a nice voice, etc. I think the automated stuff, I think, I'm not really, I don't think it'll ever get over this kind of uncanny valley thing, which I don't think we have as interpreters, at least. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm a little bit more cynical about AI than other people. I think a lot of it is hyped up. There are dangers. I think, maybe some people who want to cut costs, maybe will say, oh, well, we'll just use AI or subtitles, etc. But I don't think in terms of quality, it will be able to compete with human interpreters. But that's my opinion. Maybe I might think differently in 10 years' time, but that's the way I see things at the moment.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think I'm not sure I fully agree. I think there will probably be some uses of AI, and that at the end of the day, AI or automated subtitling or whatever new technologies, emerge, and human professional conference interpreters will exist side by side, and there will be there will be space for everyone. I saw a question that I believe has been answered in the Q&A about will there still be opportunity? Is it worth still studying languages or translation and interpreting? And I'd say absolutely, because there's always, as Kevin said, AI is never going to be able to replace us fully, and there's always going to be opportunities to do with language careers. Maybe since it's almost, 12 o'clock Brussels time, 11 o'clock UK time, I could just move on to the last topic that I wanted to try and cover today under the sort of challenges and opportunities in a fast evolving world. And that's something that Kevin has already mentioned in his introduction. It's to do with remote interpreting and providing more and more of our services online to meeting participants who don't necessarily have to travel to Brussels, say, for a half-day meeting or for just a 30-minute presentation. Obviously, a huge acceleration in this regard has happened, during and since the pandemic. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, how our work, nowadays compares to the work we were doing before the pandemic. How much remote interpreting do we actually do? To what point has it become part of our daily reality? And again, what are some of the challenges and opportunities associated with distance interpreting? I've sort of lost track of whom I've been giving the floor to, but perhaps I can start with Anna. I feel I haven't heard Anna in a while.
I'd just like to go back to what Kate said about the confidentiality with the previous subject too, because I think that's a huge point, and one that I wanted to just reiterate. So turning to the subject of remote interpreting, the pandemic was hard, and things happened extremely quickly during that. It was hard for everyone in every area, and it was hard also for interpreting services to provide the service. Before the pandemic, we would from time to time have either recorded speeches or people who were broadcast into the room, and there was a verification prior to, and essentially an agreement as to what the interpreting team would do. Then suddenly we were thrust into the situation where everyone had to stay at home. And at the European Parliament, things happened really quickly. They shifted gears fast. And in the first days, the system was a bit, we were all very new to it, I would say. That's the best way I think I could put it. And sometimes the sound was extremely challenging to understand, let alone interpret. With time, it has improved greatly, and the service made an enormous effort to talk to people, do outreach, to understand what was needed so that we could hear and be able to provide the service under those conditions. So which microphones, which devices, where a person should be. And I think we've come a long way in that, and since that very first day in March 2020. Now we're all back on site. And what does our work look like today? It looks a lot like it did before, but there is just a little bit more of a fluid coexistence of remote interpreting with what we were doing previously when we were all in the room. And so you'll have a hearing, for example, where an expert will connect remotely. And there are sound checks that are carried out before the hearing takes place. And recently, the European Parliament's services and the interpreters came to an agreement on what types of conditions should be put into place to make sure that the service can be provided in a way that makes it feasible, but safe as well. And so I would say that we're really now in a place where I'm quite happy with what has happened, in that generally the work is similar to what it was like pre-pandemic, but with that added value of being able to have people who don't need to travel across the world to deliver a speech, or for whatever reason need to be able to connect remotely. And doing everything possible to make sure that when that happens, we can hear them, we can see them, we can understand them, and it's safe and doable for everyone.
Okay, maybe Kevin, since we're on the Brussels institutions, we can talk a little bit about SCIC.
I mean, I think it is a very similar situation at SCIC. And we've seen that there's an increase in remote participants. We tend to be sitting in the booth. We come into work as usual, but there are more people who will connect remotely to the meeting. I think the challenge is that it's not quite there yet in all cases. Sometimes, people have very good connections, very good sound. It works quite well, but it doesn't always work well. And there are a few reasons for that: poor connection sometimes. Also the fact that while we do a lot of outreach saying, please, use a headset, use a proper microphone, etc., people don't always do that. And I think in some cases it's for the reasons that they just don't have them. Sometimes you have people in remote places that just don't have the good connection, don't have the good sound equipment. Sometimes people just are like, oh, I forgot. And that's so you just have to keep doing outreach, and SCIC keeps doing it. We're constantly doing outreach to try and really raise awareness that when somebody is connecting to a meeting and they have to be interpreted, it's one thing to connect and address a room of people and maybe the sound isn't great, but an interpreter needs very, very good sound. And I don't think people are always conscious of that. And we really try to raise awareness that, if you're going to be interpreted, the sound has to be good. And it's not always the case yet. But I think that's something that will improve over time. I think the platforms through which people connect will get better. They're still not there yet either. It's not always the fault of the participant. It's not always the fault of, the poor sound equipment. It's often the fault of the platform that just doesn't connect. There's always kinds of problems, etc. But that will get better over time. I'm convinced of that. I'm less of a skeptic about that. I'm really certain that they will improve. They will get better. But it's just a constant. That's kind of one of our jobs now, is constantly trying to raise awareness of people, saying, really, look, you really need to have the proper sound. You really need to have a good connection, but I think that will improve eventually. But that is a challenge still. It's still a challenge. It's not there yet.
Great, thank you very much. What about at the court, Kate?
We're quite fortunate in that, of course, when the pandemic hit, we also had to adapt, and we came back to hearings with remote participants in May 2020. And we were also lucky because it was very important to ensure top quality of sound for the hearings. And so we'd have tests with the remote participants a week in advance to test the sound quality. We insisted, especially because these are often government lawyers, parties who can afford to buy a decent microphone. So we would insist on a unidirectional gooseneck microphone, one of the ones that actually goes straight to your mouth. So we were able to insist on top quality sound, and we'd have a test on the morning as well. And what we found was it was doable. It wasn't, or it was perhaps more tiring to do the interpreting remotely. But we found that the participants, the parties to the proceedings, I think they preferred to have that rapport with the judges, especially when it got to the question and answer session after their main pleadings before the court. I think they preferred to come and plead in person and have that interaction with the judges and be there. So now the rules of procedure at the court say that you can only participate in a hearing remotely if there's a force majeure reason. So luckily we don't do very much remote interpreting anymore, or with distant remote participants. But yes, I think in the future, with the environmental factors involved and perhaps some improvement in sound quality and so on, it might be something that we see overall. But luckily for the time being, we don't do that very often now.
Thanks very much. Yeah, this is something that I think Kevin also mentioned earlier, that at the end of the day, people do like taking part in meetings or hearings or whatever it is in person, because it allows you to sort of soak up that atmosphere in a way that you were describing, Kate. I imagine that, if you were a lawyer, I mean, I would imagine that it almost heightens your performance to be in a courtroom, in a court setting, with the judges there in front of you, having to plea rather than having to do it in front of a screen from your home. And, for a lot of the meetings that we do in Brussels, the most important part is often not necessarily the meeting itself, it's the networking that goes on around it. It's the talks, to your colleagues in the corridors, it's the coffee breaks, it's all those other things that happen around the meeting room that are perhaps not more important. That might be an exaggeration, but it's also extremely important for meeting participants. So there's clearly a balance to be struck between when does it make sense to have meetings taking place remotely, participants joining remotely, and again, when is it perhaps almost a climate related imperative, and when does it make more sense to have people in the room. This actually brings me to a question that was in the Q&A from Anna, which was, do you think, with view of climate change, the EU institutions will have opportunities for freelance interpreters to work remotely, that is, from their homes in other EU countries? I don't know if anyone, maybe you can just, if anyone wants to take the floor on this, can just give me a little wave. Kevin, go ahead.
For the time being, no. I think given what the policy at the moment is, at least, we come and we work in the booths, but it's the participants who are often remote. So again, if there's a remote participant, it's the participants who are remote. Now, again, it's impossible to predict the future, but I think, again, given issues around confidentiality that were mentioned quite a bit, etc., all of that is quite important at the European level with the EU meetings. And so the idea is that the interpreters are sitting, in the booth, and it's the participants who are remote. So, for example, somebody isn't going to fly all the way from New Zealand, for example, to give a speech, or to give a presentation. That would be done remotely. I don't know, maybe Kate said she wanted to say something, I think.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that at the moment, for confidentiality reasons, we provide a preparation day, not just to staff members, but all interpreters. If you get hired for a day's interpreting at the court, you get a full day's preparation that's paid for. So you're always hired for 2 days just for a 1-day hearing. And at the moment, for confidentiality reasons, you have to access the documents on site, and I don't think they would want to have people not only preparing from a different country, but also interpreting quite confidential matters sometimes from elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even, during the height of the pandemic, we were never called upon to work from home. I believe maybe Anna can say something, that there was during the pandemic a system of hubs set up in some countries, and some freelancers maybe worked from hubs, but that's certainly not the case anymore. And I don't see that becoming much of a trend in the future either.
Yes, during the pandemic, there were hubs in some of the European capitals, and some people were working and connecting, working from home and connecting to the teams in the meetings. That was mainly a space issue, because since we had to be in separate booths, we, 24 booths became 8 booths because of the fact that each individual interpreter had to have their own space. So that's no longer happening. But I did kind of want to link back to, I love hearing, it's so great to hear from Kate and how different all of the institutions are in terms of the way, what they need to provide by way of service and how it's structured. So it's really, I'm learning a lot myself today. But I wanted to just say that I thought maybe one of the interesting illustrations of what we said about people wanting to be in the room when they can be, and the use of remote, is when Zelensky came for the first time to the European Parliament. And I say came, but he was actually, connected remotely. But then the second time, when it was possible for him to actually be in the European Parliament, in the hemicycle, he was there. So that's a great illustration, I think, of the type of use that maybe remote and people connecting remotely can have in the world of interpreting.
Yeah, thank you very much. And, I would imagine also that the meetings, where, as you say, for space reasons, actually, more than climate, considerations, people were interpreting for hubs. Those were presumably often public meetings anyway, so the whole issue of confidentiality that Kate was touching upon didn't really arise. But I have a very hard time imagining the, say, Council of Ministers here in Brussels agreeing to let people, listen in on their meetings from anywhere without knowing who's actually sitting behind that screen, because, again, the meetings can often be extremely confidential. There's one question linked to AI, not to AI, to RSI, remote simultaneous interpreting, in the chat, which is, can you refuse to interpret a participant in RSA if the sound is too bad? And I think I can say for all three institutions categorically yes. Whether or not to interpret a speaker is always very much at the discretion of the interpreter. And if you, as the interpreter, feel that the sound coming in is not of a sufficient quality to allow you to do your work, you say so on mic and you don't interpret them. There was one more comment as well in the Q&A, more of a comment than a question on AI, that I'd just like to come back to, because we talked about it earlier. And I think this is actually a really great comment from Lorenzo, saying that the more refined and effective AI becomes, the greater the demand for people with excellent language skills and a good command of multiple languages, who will be badly needed to fine-tune automated translation and interpreting tools. And so I think that's also something that we and anyone, thinking about studying languages, coming into a language profession, should keep in mind, is that we don't know, what future professions might be out there. Now with, again, chat GPT and all that, we're seeing a market of, AI prompters emerging, a new sort of profession almost that didn't exist, 12, 18 months ago. And I'm sure that the same is true for languages. We cannot predict at this point in time where a career in languages might take you in the future. Also in relation to new technologies. So my message to anyone thinking about learning languages, thinking about interpreting and translating out there, is if it's what you enjoy, do it. And I'm sure there will always be a way for you to utilize that, being in the European institutions or just elsewhere out there in the world of multilingualism. We're coming almost to the end of our time here, so I'm just going to check if there's any more questions that we can perhaps answer in the chat. There's one from Dorothea, which has been sitting there for quite a while unanswered, which is, what type of issues do you get in interpreting? I'll perhaps let you guys think about that one while I look to another question, which just disappeared because it seems it was answered. It was to do with freelance interpreting again. But sort of,
Can I jump in with an issue? Because that's rather broad. I think that's why I didn't get answered, because there are various different issues. And so I'll just pick up on one, which is perhaps people reading texts out at texts that are written texts at breakneck speed, especially our lawyers that come and they prepare it nicely, and then they get a bit nervous in the grand chamber, the courtrooms, and then they just proceed to read something which isn't spoken language at breakneck speed. That's definitely a challenge. You adapt to that as during your career. You get better at distilling the gist of the message if it's simply too dense because it's not designed for the spoken word. And I think that's one challenge we have. And the lawyers increasingly do provide us with texts, but then they don't always stick to them. And so it's one thing, if you are an interpreting student, I'd recommend sometimes working in simultaneous with text. It's a good skill and it might come in useful, although they don't stick to the text.
That's an excellent, I saw all three of us here nodding away, an excellent issue to have highlighted. Anna?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I love that all four of us were sitting here nodding. I think that would definitely be the biggest issue. I think that I can't even think of anything else that I would like to underscore as much as that one.
Any other issues to add there, Kevin?
No, I think we're all agreed about the read out speeches. It's just horrible, It's a problem for us as well in SCIC sometimes, and I think the ideal would be if we could communicate to people that no, your message will get across, even if it's not being interpreted. Your message will get across better if you speak naturally, slowly, better. But the thing is, not everybody is a good public speaker. People have to, make presentations on things or talk about things when they're not necessarily very comfortable with it. And they just think that the best thing to do is, I'll just write it all out and I'll read it and they tend to do it a lot more quickly. And it takes a while, and you maybe need to train people, but it's difficult. It's very hard, and that's one of the hardest things. And you know, when you're an interpreter, you just do what you can do. Really, you have to try and summarize it. You have to try and take out the most essential bits of information, try and put them across as nicely as you can. That's all you can do. Hopefully, actually make the message sound a bit nicer, even if some of the content is lost. But even the people sitting in the room listening wouldn't have got all the content anyway if it's read out at breakneck speed. So I think it comes out the same in the end. I hope.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I think the key takeaway there is to sort of try and raise awareness, amongst the participants, that even someone listening to you in that language will not have understood everything you've said if you just read out your speech. It's much more effective to just try and communicate and get your message across. So you will see that I just put a QR code on the screen. There's a number of links that my colleague Diana has posted in the chat. So since the session is about to end, I would recommend that everybody go and copy any links that they found interesting. But since I know there will also be people watching the recording of this session who won't have access to the chat, here is a QR code that will take you to all of the websites that could be of any use or interest to anyone thinking about in a career in interpreting at the European institutions. It takes you to all three websites: the Parliament, the European Court of Justice, and the European Commission Interpreting Services websites, and a lot of the information that would be useful for you is on there. One final question in the Q&A is, why are you interpreters and not translators instead? One thing I can perhaps recommend for that is the session with more of our colleagues tomorrow on Saturday morning. I think it's at 11:45, a session entitled "Is Interpreting for Me?" And I'm sure that that is exactly the kind of question that they will be covering there. And I'd like to perhaps wrap up this session by giving the floor just one last time to each of the panelists. If perhaps in, a couple of words, you could tell us, maybe what you're worried or particularly excited about when you think about the future of interpreting and where we might be in, 10, 15 years' time. Can I start with you, Kate?
I would say perhaps drawing a parallel with translation, where I'd much prefer to translate than post-edit a text. I see us maybe sitting in a booth with these various screens where, as you say, the automated subtitles are popping up, and we're there to improve on that and speak into the microphone. But I think the positive aspect is, as Kevin said, people won't want to listen to the robot voice, and we'll still have to, that will be perhaps just a tool rather than what we are forced to say. If there is some automatic subtitles on the screen, I'll still have to use my brain. I'll still have to add the colourful language, and hopefully I'll still be needed. So I think there is that positive aspect still.
Thank you. Anna?
I'm only slightly concerned that young people will begin to focus on English as the vehicular language to communicate with the rest of the world and not necessarily learn other languages. And so I would really just hope that people would consider that it's worthwhile to learn German to speak with a German, and Danish to speak with a Dane, and I'm really focusing on Europe here, but you understand that applies to the rest of the world too. So that would be my concern. But my point of optimism is that every time we start to see some sort of a development that leads us to believe that multilingualism won't be here to stay, I find that it is reinforced by something, and that it grows stronger. And so I'm really excited to see if indeed there are other languages that join the mix over here, what that will look like. And I hope to keep doing this job as long as I possibly can, because it's a fantastic one, and it's something that is really exhilarating, interesting, and motivating on a daily basis.
I couldn't agree more. Kevin?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to beat what Anna said there. That would actually be the best conclusion, to be honest with you. But I would really just echo what she says. And I think I just really encourage people that you know, wherever you come from, I don't think just focusing on English is the right thing. I mean, it's a big world, and I think, you know, to really try and understand where people are coming from, you have to learn their language, you know, and rather than just communicating in a sort of fairly formless, you know, emotionless English. I think, you know, really learning, people learning each other's language is really the key to understanding each other, and hopefully people continue to do that well into the future, whatever the challenges are.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. I think that brings us to the end of our time. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining me on this panel here today. Thank you very much to Jonathan from the London Language Show, who organized this. Thank you to the London Language Show for having us, Diana for managing the chat, everyone in our institutions who helped put this together, and of course to all the participants. I felt this was a very engaged audience, you know, asking lots of questions, and I hope we've been able to answer most of them, even though I'm sure there's some people who would like to continue the discussion. As I say, tomorrow, I've just been corrected. It's at 10:45 UK time, 11:45 Brussels time is the session on Is Interpreting for Me. So you'll get to meet some more of our colleagues. Again, all three institutions will be represented at that one as well. So if you have any more questions about what it's like being an interpreter, please do tune into that session. That's all from us here on this panel. Have a lovely rest of the day. Enjoy the London Language Show, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much, everybody.